In his first New Year's address to the Polish people, President Karol Nawrocki pointed out that next year, the pillars of the Polish state should be development, security, and a better life for citizens. I say these words with a sense of great honor and gratitude, but also responsibility. With these words, Polish President Karol Nawrocki began his first New Year's address. Karol Nawrocki once again thanked the Polish people for placing such great trust in him. He pointed out that this decision by the nation is a clear signal to the government. In the past year, Poles have made it clear with their choice that they do not like the current situation. They have clearly shown that the country is not moving in the right direction, that change is needed, and that the voice of the citizens must once again be the decisive voice. Poles elected Karol Nawrocki as president on June 1st, 2025.
Niech Bóg błogosławi Polsce! Niech żyje Polska!
More than half a year has passed since then. It would seem that this is enough time for the Prime Minister to understand that something is clearly wrong with his policies. However, there is no indication that the head of government has drawn any conclusions. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk published a New Year's video, not for the first time in history recorded in a foreign language, this time in English. The head of government is convinced that things are great and will get even better. Let's take a look at the achievements the Prime Minister is talking about. The head of government boasts of low unemployment and falling inflation. That's all well and good, Prime Minister, except that unemployment was already at a record low during the Law and Justice Party's term in office. As for GDP, it is growing rapidly, but the budget is in a dire state. The deficit for this year exceeds 270 billion zloty. Development cannot be just a statistic. A strong state does not exist only in economic reports. A strong state exists in the everyday lives of its citizens. If we want to remain among the best, we must translate this development into the everyday lives of every Polish woman and man. In his speech, the Prime Minister also forgot to mention the catastrophic situation of the healthcare system. Łukasz Jankowski, president of the Supreme Medical Chamber, warned that the National Health Fund is bankrupt. In addition, maternity wards are being closed in Poland, and the government is saying that women should give birth in hospital emergency rooms. A strong and developed country cannot leave the sick without help or women in labor without care. Prime Minister Tusk also claims credit for securing the Polish-Belarusian border. The head of government forgot to mention that the wall on the border was built by the Law and Justice government, and his party voted against the wall. We will not support them in such, to put it mildly, ambiguous ventures. He will build a wall and a fence, and then another wall, and it would be best to connect electricity to it. Not only that, but his politicians were part of Russian propaganda, insulting soldiers and border guards. Donald Tusk himself was in favor of accepting illegal migrants. These are poor people who are looking for their place on earth, and there is no need for such disgusting, grim propaganda. When Donald Tusk saw that the nation thought quite differently and that times were pre-war, at least in the declarative version, he adopted a different narrative. President Karol Nawrocki spoke about the obligation to arm and prepare for a possible war. We must consistently build and expand our armed forces. Peace has a cost, but war always costs more. Poland is strong in NATO, but above all, we must rely on ourselves. Despite geopolitical tensions and increasingly strong Russian provocations in Poland, Prime Minister Donald Tusk blocked President Nawrocki's access to the heads of the secret services. Fortunately, this is about to change. The president got his way, and the meeting is to take place after the 6th of January. I think it's good that the heads of the services, together with the supervising ministers, will finally meet with the president at the presidential palace. It could have been like this from the very beginning. The president talked about what these issues are, issues related to the services plans for next year, but also issues related to the situation in Poland. The past year, 2025, was marked by the alleged restoration of the rule of law. The Prime Minister did not mention this in his wishes for Europeans. For some reason, he did not want to talk about opposition MPs who, unable to count on fair trials, are staying abroad. It seems that Donald Tusk prefers this topic not to be discussed on the international stage. One wonders why.
Year's celebrations are normally a joyous affair, but residents of Amsterdam's migrant-dominated neighborhoods feared for their lives when armed and aggressive gangs took to the streets.
In de jaren 80 stond hij op de nominatie om gesloopt te worden. Dat is gelukkig.
En dat je dat mee moet maken tot dat zomaar af.
Attacks on police officers, paramedics, and ordinary people took place. Streets became battlefields. This is despite the extraordinary security measures introduced by the authorities. In some cities, New Year's Eve celebrations did not take place at all due to the threat of violence. The New Year's Eve riots in the Netherlands are an example of how mass immigration affects daily life. It has become a dangerous situation, and the widespread threat of crime emerging in Western Europe directly impacts normal people's lives. Shortly after midnight, the historic 150-year-old Van der Kerk church, located near the center of Amsterdam, went up in flames. The fire started in the tower of the temple, which collapsed completely despite the efforts of firefighters.
Houten balken die vielen ook gewoon brandend naar beneden. En dat was natuurlijk ook heel eng. En de mensen die stonden echt konden niet geloven wat ze zagen.
The authorities are investigating whether it was an accident or arson, as there were dozens of fires in the Netherlands on New Year's Eve. What we saw at night in the Netherlands was not just a fire in a former church. There were also other incidents. A gym, a sports hall, and a shop burned down. This illustrates just how far public safety has deteriorated. In Berlin, over 400 aggressive individuals, mainly immigrants, were detained for attempting to disrupt New Year's Eve celebrations. Other German cities also saw attacks on police officers and residents. After aggressive migrants turned the streets of Berlin into pandemonium last year, attacking people, looting shops, and intimidating residents, this time Germany sent additional police forces to the capital to control the threat. Last night, neighborhoods near Paris, inhabited mainly by immigrants from the Middle East and North Africa, also erupted. Instead of taking to the streets, the French locked themselves in their homes to survive until morning. But the aggressors made themselves known again. Women were particularly at risk of attack. Like every year, New Year's Eve in France resembles scenes of a civil war. This year, more than 800 cars were burned, dozens of police officers were injured, and hundreds of rioters were arrested. The perpetrators are mostly young criminals of immigrant origin, usually living in the suburbs of large cities. Wherever mass immigration from the Third World is made policy, New Year's Eve celebrations are underscored with the ever-present threat of random violence. The threat gets worse every year as more and more migrants arrive. This experiment in social engineering has consequences. This can be seen in the New Year's Eve riots in the Netherlands, where attempts to forcibly change the rules of our civilization, combined with a flood of immigration, have resulted in every public celebration being marked by disorder and chaos. In Amsterdam, Paris, Berlin, and Brussels, the damage caused by the New Year's Eve riots is being assessed. The new year in these cities is once again beginning with aggression from migrants. The past 12 months have brought a series of decisions and events that have begun to reshape the global balance of power. The year 2026 will show whether this process means stabilization or the beginning of an even more turbulent phase. The United States plays an important role in many key areas of the world as the main point of reference for diplomacy, international security, and, where necessary, military force.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
Donald Trump began his second term in the White House by announcing a rebuilding of the United States' international standing, pressure on allies, and tough negotiations with adversaries. The decisions made in Washington in 2025 have largely shaped the current international landscape and will influence what the coming months will bring.
China, first row.
The most important global front remains the rivalry between the United States and China. After the tariff war and tensions over Taiwan, relations between the two powers have entered a new, more diplomatic phase. In 2026, mutual visits by Donald Trump and Xi Jinping are possible, which could set the direction for relations in the coming years.
What's going to be agreed at those meetings? What kind of commercial truce might Presidents Trump and Xi seek, and at what cost? I'm particularly concerned about what President Trump might give up in other strategic areas having to do with AI, having to do with Taiwan, having to do with U.S. allies in the Indo-Pacific.
At the same time, China's relations with Japan, one of the US's most important allies in Asia, remain an important piece of the puzzle.
I think the Chinese government really do need to find ways to ease tensions with Japan, because China-Japan relationship is inherently a very emotional one in China anyway, even without the recent dispute with the Prime Minister.
The division of the world into two rival power blocs is also becoming increasingly clear. Symbolic images from Beijing, where Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, and President Xi appeared side by side, show the strengthening of cooperation between countries hostile to the West.
A long-term decline in the number of wars and number of people killed in wars in the duration of war. And then from the Arab Spring, that began to change. We started to see more wars emerging. And 2024 was the highest number of state-to-state wars since the end of World War II. So this has been a really sort of global trend. And underpinning this is really been the end of Pax America and the relative decline of the US and the role of the US as a policeman and sort of backing up.
In the Middle East, the fragile truce in the Gaza Strip has not ended tensions. The region remains one of the most volatile in the world, and any incident could lead to escalation.
So I hope Iran is not trying to build up, as I've been reading, that they're building up weapons and other things. And if they are, they're not using the sites that we obliterated, but they're using possibly different sites. We know exactly where they're going, what they're doing, and I hope they're not doing it.
Houthi attacks, tensions surrounding Iran's nuclear program, and U.S. military involvement mean the Middle East remains one of the key challenges for American diplomacy. In Europe, the war in Ukraine is entering a new phase in which modern technologies, primarily combat drones and long-range missile systems, are decisive. Last night, Russia carried out another massive attack on Ukrainian cities, using drones and cruise missiles. In his New Year's address, the president of Ukraine emphasized that Kyiv remains ready for peace talks and an end to the war, provided this means real security guarantees.
Чого хоче Україна? Миру? Так. Чи будь-якою ціною? Ні. Ми хочемо закінчення війни, але не закінчення України. Чи втомились ми? Сильно. Чи значить це, що ми готові здатись? Сильно помиляється той, хто так думає.
Declarations of peace come at a time when Europe is increasingly preparing for a long-term change in the security environment, adapting its defense doctrines in the context of a possible reduction in U.S. involvement. Africa remains outside the mainstream of attention. Sudan is plunging into a humanitarian crisis, with millions of people left without access to basic aid. In Nigeria and the Sahel region, violence by Islamic terrorist groups is on the rise, raising fears of another wave of migration towards Europe. In a world full of tensions, there is also a symbol of continuity. Last year, the Catholic Church elected a new pope. His voice calls for dialogue and diplomacy at a time when more and more countries are resorting to force as their primary political tool. On this solemn day, at the beginning of the new year, let us approach this nativity scene with faith, as a place of true peace, a place of blessing, where we remember the miracles performed by the Lord. Then let us set out again, like the humble witnesses of the cave, praising God for all we have seen and heard. The year 2026 promises to be a time of rapid change on the political, military, and economic fronts. The world is entering a new phase of global competition, with the key question of whether diplomacy will prove stronger than weapons.
How did the world welcome the new year? Let's take a look. First up, Australia. Sydney welcomes 2026 with the city's largest ever fireworks display, which included a waterfall effect cascading from the top of the iconic Sydney Harbour Bridge. Taiwan's tallest skyscraper provided the backdrop for a dazzling fireworks display. First held in 2003, the Taipei Show has become one of Taiwan's most watched television events, drawing crowds to the streets every year. This time, Hong Kong celebrated the New Year with a light show and countdown in the Central District instead of fireworks. The facades of 8 landmark buildings in central Hong Kong were transformed into giant clocks, counting down to midnight. Thousands of people gathered on Qatar's Lusail Boulevard to welcome the new year with a dazzling fireworks display. The Lusail Plaza towers lit up and displayed the year 2026. There was also a drone show above the towers. And now we move to Europe. We start with Athens. A colorful fireworks display lit up the ancient monuments and the Parthenon Temple on the Acropolis. London celebrated the arrival of the new year with a spectacular fireworks display over the iconic London Eye on the south bank of the Thames. Paris welcomed 2026 with a fireworks display around the iconic monuments of the French capital. Most of the celebrations centered around the Arc de Triomphe and along the iconic Champs-Élysées. In New York's Times Square, the new year 2026 was welcomed with fireworks and the annual ball drop. This time after the ball dropped, it rose again, sparkling in red, white, and blue, to mark the nation's 250th anniversary. Finally, Brazil. Millions of people welcomed the new year on Copacabana Beach in Rio de Janeiro during a celebration aimed at breaking the city's record as the host of the largest New Year's Eve party.